Good afternoon, I'm Doug Cochran. Today's topic, covering the Doolittle raid during World War II's Battle of the Pacific, is very near and dear to me. Firstly, I enjoy history, military history, and especially military aviation history, having spent some time in the Air Force. Secondly, this story has direct ties to our local community, which we will learn about in a few minutes. Lastly, General Jimmy Doolittle had a very simple philosophy of life. He shared this when asked during an award presentation for him, and I quote, "I believe that we were put on this earth for a purpose. That purpose is to make within our capabilities a better place in which to live. We can do this by painting a picture, writing a poem, building a bridge, protecting the environment, combating prejudice and injustice, providing help to those in need, or in 1,000 other ways, just so we serve." It is my honor to introduce today's guest speaker. Richard Burton Peterson is the founder of the Doolittle Raiders Remembrance Project, an initiative dedicated to preserving and sharing the extraordinary story of the World War II Doolittle raid. His family holds a direct connection to this history. His uncle, J.C. Townsend, and his father, Dan Peterson, were involved in the overseas suitability screening and evaluation of the B-25 crews, whose skills would influence selection for the top-secret mission that became the Doolittle raid. Their wartime work also led to a family love story, making this history deeply personal for Richard. Beyond his commitment to honoring the Raiders, Peterson is well known throughout the Midlands for his leadership in broadcasting, community engagement, and regional development. A graduate of the University of South Carolina School of Journalism, he has served in roles ranging from radio station management to president and CEO of the Lake Murray Chamber of Commerce. His community work includes promoting heritage tourism, supporting local history programs, and highlighting the cultural and economic value of the Lake Murray region. Through his speaking, storytelling, and historical advocacy, Richard Peterson continues to ensure that the heroism of the Doolittle Raiders and the legacy of the families connected to them remain alive for future generations. Please join me in a warm Rotary welcome for Richard Peterson.
Let me state right off the beginning here that a lot of the information that I'll be giving you is information I've received over a lifetime, and it's my opinion of what is going on at certain aspects before and after the Doolittle raid. So I want to make sure that I'm not a documented historian, but over the years I put all the facts together, and this first one is one that the U.S. Army Air Corps didn't like to make sure they tried to keep it hidden. But over 10 years before the Doolittle Raiders, Rear Admiral Harry Yarnell, there was a big debate all the time in the Navy and the Air Force about battleships versus aircraft carriers. And this had gotten to a point because the battleships were very popular because of what we did in the Spanish-American War, eliminating the Spanish fleet, and then in World War I we had very little activity, but they believed the future of the Navy was in battleships. So on February 7, 1932, Rear Admiral Yarnell had Fleet Problem 13. This was a war games and a mock attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack north of Hawaii was a Sunday morning, and it was a converted battleship that they were flying 152 biplanes off of. The biplanes only dropped flares and sacks of flour. Okay, so when they did this attack, they destroyed every ship and aircraft in Hawaii at the time. Now, the admirals in charge, of course, they said it was very unfair competition and could never happen. The Saturday Press on March the 1st, 1932, it said, attacking Blue Fleet wins maneuvers off Pacific coast. Now, when that was put up, I don't know if you saw Sunday morning, but it also talked about this past Sunday how many Nazi spies were in Hawaii at the time, but also Japanese spies. So when they heard about this, they went and got all the information of what General Yarnell had put together, and that was the attack plan that they used to attack Pearl Harbor. So it was an exact duplicate, and I'll point out a couple of reasons why we're glad that they stuck to that at the beginning. So if we, what was going on in Columbia, South Carolina? Well, Columbia, South Carolina was actually doing very well during the recession, and one of the things is this was the official Christmas gift from the city of Columbia back in 2021. But one of the big things was the Big Apple. People don't realize it, but the Big Apple was, of course, on this originally 1907. It was a Jewish synagogue, and in 1936. With this very vibrant black community, this was kind of the center of it. What happened was that the dance became so popular that the mayor of Charlotte asked to have the Big Apple dancers come to Charlotte. And when they did that, it was like the Beatles showed up. Everybody went crazy. So the newspaper in Charlotte was tied in with the New York Times, and they carried that article, and it was in the New York newspaper. Well, the New York mayor called and said, hey, we want the Doolittle Raiders to come, not the Doolittle, excuse me. We want the Big Apple dancers to come in. And if you see right here, Big Apple was recorded by the Dorsey Brothers Orchestra, and the Big Apple became a best-selling hit in September of 1937. Okay, well, what had happened, this is my mom, she was born in my Uncle JC, and what is now the St. Thomas More Catholic Student Center at USC. That was my Irish grandmother's house. It's at the corner of Pickens and Green. And as a young college student, as a Tridel, she would come and sneak in here with her sorority sisters and their boyfriends. And as you go into the club, if you go up the steps, there's a balcony because Hasidic Jews did not worship with each other. The women had to stay in the balcony and the men were on the floor. So they would sneak in and look at what was happening with the Big Apple dancers, and they would go back to USC, and it was quite a hit. Well, my mom ended up, when they asked to have them come to New York, unfortunately, the city said, we can't have a black group of dancers to go up and represent him. Go down and get the judge's daughter who's been sneaking in down there. So they brought all those people up and said, guess what? Y'all are going to New York as the as the Big Apple dancers. So like you do plays and things like that, they're centered out of New York, and they were sending these dance groups all over the country. And so basically, that is how New York got its nickname, the Big Apple. Thank you very much. Now, this is my dad, Dan Peterson. He grew up in Steubenville, Ohio, and unfortunately, his best friend was Dean Martin. And because of that, he got in a lot of trouble. And in high school, they sent him away to military school. This is Dad here. And he excelled in the military ways and became an officer right off the bat, and played football at Ohio State as a freshman and was so good that Yale came to him and basically paid him as a ringer. They said, if you come play, got a sack full of stacked 20s during the recession, they said, you're gonna get a bag like this every semester. So he played football for Yale his last 3 years, and because he was the big man on campus, he got to be part of the secret societies, and he got to know all the big wheels, even though he wasn't This is him after the war. Of course, he joined the Army, and he was already in the Army and working in intelligence. So what happens, all this is going on, and on December 7th, of course, the whole world changed. Now, this gives you an idea of where the Japanese attacked. If you notice, people always talk about Pearl Harbor, but they were actually attacking all over the Orient. And this gives you some of the ideas of all the different areas that they were attacking simultaneously. They sent a communique to General MacArthur and said, MacArthur, you be ready because they're going to be attacking you. And his reply were, tails in the air, meaning he put the planes in the air. Well, he didn't. He was asleep at the wheel. The Japanese showed up and blew up his entire Air Force. And so he was left undefended, and they actually wanted to court-martial him, but they thought it would be a bad PR move. So they went ahead and let him be rescued, and from there, we don't need to go into all that. This gives you an idea about Pearl Harbor, what it looked like. This is, if I'm pointing this, I don't know if you can see them. This is Battleship Row right here. And those were all the largest battleships were. And unfortunately, because they were still under World War I type of defense, like idiots, they took all the planes and had them all grouped together on the runways so the guards could go around them and protect the planes. That was sitting ducks for the Japanese when they showed up and started bombing. Now this right here gives you an idea of the magnitude of the bombs. This plane up here has just dropped a bomb and missed the boat, missed the ship. But you see how big that plume is, and when those things hit the boat, I'm sure you've seen that one where the smokestack comes blowing out. They did a great job of really disabling all the ships. One of the first things they went in as part of a defensive strategy was to hit all the air bases that were on the islands. Of course, Wheeler, Hickam, Bellows, Ford, Ewa, and Kenobi. This shows you the USS Utah, one of 3 ships that were so badly damaged they couldn't use it. So you look at the ships that were totally destroyed, the 3 on your right, Utah, Arizona, and Oklahoma. But on the left, these ships sank, but they actually put them all back into action, and within a year, the majority of these were in the middle of the fight. Now, unfortunately, when they attacked, they followed the original Yarnell, which Yarnell didn't say anything about attacking the fuel, and didn't say anything about attacking the shipyard. So all those ships that got bombed, they had the facilities right there to repair them all, and by missing those 2 targets that they were supposed to hit on the 3rd run, that they decided not to take the 3rd run. That would have really crippled our entire Navy at the time. Now, this right here is going to give you a better idea of the kill ratio of what happened. You look at U.S. military killed, over 2,300 U.S. civilians killed. There were a lot of civilian employees that were working at the different bases, and they were fair game in these bombing straights. U.S. military personnel, over 1,100. Now, U.S. civilians wounded, and then U.S. ships damaged and returned to service 13. U.S. ships sunk, raised, repaired, and returned to service 5. U.S. ships destroyed 3. U.S. aircraft damaged 159. U.S. aircraft destroyed 169. Now this is the key part right here of why they didn't come back on the 3rd raid, is because if you look at this number here, Japanese killed in the action, which a lot of people are not aware of, but they killed over 129. Now, Japanese prisoners was 1. There was these mini subs that were roaming all over the whole Hawaiian area, and their charge was any ships coming in and coming out after the Doolittle, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, that they would try and sink those ships. We ended up sinking all 5 of the subs, and this is how we ended up with our 1 capture was off the subs. Japanese aircraft destroyed. This is another number that's not really talked about, but 29 aircraft were shot down by ground fire, but also, if you've seen the movie Pearl Harbor, they also got planes in the air, and they did a really good job. As obsolete as our planes were compared to the brand new Japanese Zeros, they did a heck of a job. And then once again, 5 mini submarines were destroyed. At the time, before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States knew war was coming. And so they had appropriated all these dollars to build air bases all over the United States. And the one in Columbia was built because it's halfway between Miami and New York. They don't want to have it on the coast because they were afraid of invasion. So this was originally going to open up, and got the money together. And Lexington's always had an inferiority complex with Richland County. And of course, Richland County had Owens Field. And they knew that Owens Field was landlocked with the train stations and everything else. And with the advent of larger planes, they needed longer runways and everything. So Lexington people said, we're gonna get together and open up Lexington County Community Airport. And when they would send them the specifications of how they wanted it built, the Army would go, no, you don't need, you know, 1.5 miles, you need 2 miles of this. And so they built it to prepare for war. And all these other air bases that were built around the United States were built for a specific reason. This is my dad. At the time, he came down here the day after Pearl Harbor, and he helped secure the air base, and from there started the process of security, but also setting up the bombing range, which was out of Lake Murray, and people don't realize it, but not only did they bomb on Lake Murray or train on Lake Murray, they trained on Lake Greenwood. And all these pilots, and back then was all what we call line of sight. They would pick up certain cues off the ground and follow a train track until they got to their target, or follow a river until they got to their target. So I love this one. That's Colonel Doolittle, and his recruitment poster says, fly to Tokyo, all expenses paid. Join the U.S. Army Air Corps. So out of this, they were going to use seasoned pilots, and within the first 30 days of the Columbia Army Air Base being opened up, they were the largest B-25 installation in the world. They had all the different pilots that were all over in the crews, that were a lot of them on the West Coast, and they brought the 17th Bomber Group in here, and the 34th Squadron, which was the most famous, is the Thunderbird. You know, now we have the fabulous Thunderbirds, the flying team, and also Ford named their Thunderbird. So this was the most popular of the group, and they were really the fighters and the real hardcore bombers. The next group was the Kick and Mule, the 95th Squadron. They were also more into strafing and attacking on the ground in support of military troops. Flying Tigers was a combination of the two, bombers, but then this one here, as this jacket has here, this was the winged helmet, which was the reconnaissance squadron. Now, what they did with the Doolittle Raiders, they incorporated all these 4 different squadrons in each plane, because the original idea was for these planes to take off from the aircraft carrier and then fly to China, and then they would have film of everything as they flew over Japan and would have a better understanding of what was going on the ground. Unfortunately, none of the planes made it, but so this gives you an idea of what the patch is. These were all the different bomber groups from the 17th and the U.S. Army Air Corps. Of course, the popularity of that, because the bombers are capital city bombers, was local people that were involved. This is Lieutenant Colonel Horace Sally Crouch. He was with the Army Air Corps. He ended up trying to fly, and he flew with my uncle, but he ended up washing out. And so he became a crew member, and he was one of the ones responsible for reconnaissance to make sure all the planes had the right reconnaissance materials on each one of the planes, because as they were going to attack Japan, they were going to break up into 4 different groups and go bomb different areas of Japan. This is Nolan Herndon. This was, he was from the Edgefield district area, and he was quite a character that later on, Horace Crouch and he became good friends, that Herndon ended up marrying Horace Crouch's sister. So, First Lieutenant William Farrell, he was from Darlington. He was with the badass Thunderbirds. Richard Cole was the co-pilot for Doolittle, and he knew more about the whole operation than any other co-pilot, because he was Doolittle's right-hand man, and they were quite a pair. Mr. Richard Cole was probably 6'3", and of course Doolittle was all of about 5'4". And so he was the one that really spearheaded after the war, doing the reunions and keeping everything together, and he was the last one to die about 2.5 years ago. Now, this is my Uncle J.C. He's sitting on the wing of a Texan, and he sent this to my mom, you know, with love, Helen, J.C. Now, this gives you an idea what the B-25 bomber looked like. If you notice back here, there was a tail gunner, and there was a tube that came out so he could crawl in and crawl out. Well, for them to set up these planes, they had to add extra gas tanks, and they figured they were going to be moving forward, that they didn't have to really worry about the rear tail gunner. So they took broomsticks and stuck them out of the hole to make it look like they were machine guns. But the entire tube that was used was made into a gas tank. And they fashioned other gas tanks to fill every nook and cranny, because they knew they were going to be flying for quite a while. So they had to redesign the plane, and they did that in the Midwest. Now, this gives you an idea when they were, this gives you a process of the training on how they would approach the island. Every plane was supposed to come up following the Saluda River, and when they got to this point, the vector point here for bombing was to approach the water coming out at a 90-degree angle, right at 90, and go straight over the top of it. And if it did, it would line up Bomb Island and a few other things. Now, the Lake Murray base, and we like to call it the Army base, but it was really in support of more of a naval operation. And this is the actual base that they had out there. People don't realize where Billy Dreer landing is, and also Larry Coon landing, which is now attached to Shoal Island. That was open, and you could take boats through in between the two. So Shoal Island was one of the bombing areas. Now, the base had a maximum of 50 to 100 soldiers. At the height, it was over 150 soldiers. And they had a little bit of everything. They had, 14 boats that were fire boats and crash boats. Crash boats were designed when a plane went down for you to go out and rescue the crew and do it as quick as possible. And these guys became, you think of the early NASCAR, these guys were hopping up the motors to these boats, and they would have races and competition to see who was the fastest. And there was also a whole group of military police. If you had violated the lake and were out on the lake when you weren't supposed to, the military police would come arrest you and take you to the brig at the base and interrogate you, and then call the local police to come get them. And, there was also medical rescue. There was a very large hospital on there. Pilot retrieval, of course, with the crash boats. They of course kept the bombing range all make sure the secure area, but they would set up targets in certain areas with flags or things like that, that when the people were flying over in training, that would specify that's an island you're supposed to bomb. So it made them really keep them top of their game. Covered up to 8 islands on Lake Murray and Lake Greenwood. Now there was a separate group for Greenwood, but these guys were the ones that were controlling it. And when they would set up, once again, they would come over, supposed to be bombing on Lake Murray. Of course, they would take off and they would follow the Saluda River up until they got to Lake Greenwood, and they would bomb up there. And then all machine gun practice was held at Myrtle Beach. So if any of the gunners were practicing any of the strafing stuff that we had talked about, they would fly to Myrtle Beach, and they were strafing about where the Springs Mill area is up there at the. So this gives you an idea. That's, of course, Larry Coon Landing, which is now attached, but that was open so that they could come through. That's where the base was. And then, of course, Shoal Island and Bomb Island. And of course, here's the dam. Now, this gives you an actual enhanced photograph of what the boathouse track and docks look like at the beginning of the construction of the base. And again, Larry Coon Landing is right about here. And of course, that's the Lake Murray base. This gives you an idea of what a crash boat looked like. It was actually a Higgins boat, and from there it had railings all the way around. If you notice all these on the front, so they could lean off the boat. They had, of course, the life-saving vest, but they also had hooks that a lot of times when these planes would crash, the guys would have their jackets on, but they'd be unconscious, and they, of course, would grab the hooks to get them back in the boat. Now, there were several planes that went down, but this gives you an idea of all the components of the Doolittle Raiders and their different services. Of course, when it came time to let the crews leave, and the fallacy, and what we hate to bust everybody's bubble, but the actual Doolittle Raiders never trained here. They were already seasoned pilots, and it was the job of JC and Dad to pick the very best 16 crews, and they had backups up to 25. And from there, when they were getting ready to send the crews to Florida for the rest of their training, they had to dance. And my dad, growing up with Dean Martin, he was quite a high stepper and liked to dance. And of course, my mother being a Big Apple dancer, they ended up hooking them up for the big party. And they said when they had the party going, it was like the Red Sea. They just opened up, and Mom and Dad were out there, and here I am. This gives you an idea of what the planes looked like when they took them by crane and loaded all the planes on the aircraft carrier, and they got it double stacked. Now this is a little deceptive because they took these and actually had it long enough so that you could get off the front of the aircraft carrier. This gives you a more accurate idea about what was going on. And it was very crucial when these boats went out that the planes would start from right here at the tower. And Colonel Doolittle had a system worked out that I'll be talking about here in a minute, but this is when they told them, actually when they were out at sea, and about what the time they thought it would take to get to Hawaii. And of course, they never saw Hawaii, waited till they were past it. But this is when they told them, we're going to bomb Japan. Well, if you look at a lot of these guys, we're all like, yeah, let's go get them, let's go get them. And look at that guy there, he's going, wait a minute, we ain't landing these planes back on this aircraft carrier. You know, what's up with that? And as you can see up top here, they are in transit because they left all the engines wrapped up so that inclement weather didn't get in and affect the engines in any way. This gives you an idea on the flight crew once they were, there's a whole story about that, and there's another story about that below. Now this is Doolittle taking off, and this is, if you notice, the story about the picket boats, that we saw the picket boats and we destroyed them, they could have radioed in and let them know. I think that was all hogwash, because they waited for a storm to come up. They wanted gale force winds. As overloaded as these planes were, they were gonna need a lot of frontal wind coming in to get the planes off the deck. So what they did is he devised a system. He devised a system to where they would be right here by the conning tower, and as the boat was going through the water, and it's rocking back and forth like every ship does in inclement weather, that when he was here, the plane would take off. And as the plane was going, it's going downhill to where when it was set to come back up again, it would almost flip the plane off the end of the boat. Wow. That was all Doolittle, okay? Now, there were 16 crews, and at the last minute, there was an OSS guy that showed up, and he was gonna fly the plane number 16. They replaced him. Now, again, one of the stories that they've got to cover all that up was that they said that he thought he was gonna run out of gas, and that he had to go to Russia. Russia had a non-aggression pact with Japan. And what they wanted to do was to test the Russians to find out if they would take the crews and turn them over to the Japanese, or if they would try and stay neutral. So when they took off, that last plane ended up flying to Russia, and it was because it was preordained. Now the problem was, they had already calculated enough gas for them to land in China. The Japanese really had control of the coast, but they were supposed to fly the plane in as far as they could to the air bases there and turn them over to the Chinese government. And from there, these crews were gonna take the reconnaissance stuff out of the planes, and they would leave the planes with them, and then they would make their way back to the United States. Well, because they took off early, they barely had enough gas to make it to the coast. And, you know, there's so many instances where they said God was on our side. They had a hell of a tailwind that really got them to the coast, and God was looking out for them. This right here shows you the original entry from the USS Hornet logs on April 18th, the day of flight. And this is what they had monitored from Japan. It said Ministry of Propaganda for Home Consumption from radio. Tokyo states enemy bombers appeared over Tokyo just before noon today and inflicted heavy damage on schools and hospitals in its first raid of the war. Strictly propaganda. What they did was they had two sets of bombs. They had heavy impact bombs, but they also had incendiary bombs. Now they were going for these different factories that they were going to drop a bomb on the factory, but unfortunately the main thing they want to do is drop the incendiary bombs, because all these factories had little huts all around the outside of the manufacturing area. And those incendiary bombs, once flames got to that, the whole place went up in smoke. So if you've got several places that are building war materials for the Japanese, and they no longer have a place to live, that helped with psychological warfare of saying, wait a minute, we're not, all this stuff they're feeding us is not, there's a whole nother story about that. We bombed Japan, Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. So these were the 4 different groups that went to those. Once they got the coast, they had their land places where they knew to follow and make their drop, and all of them hit their targets. And one of the things that saved them was that when they got the planes up in the air, number one, if the story about the picket boat saw them and they radioed back, they would have known they were coming and they'd been waiting for them. So that was never an issue. When they showed up, nobody understood what was going on. And they said that the pilots, when they were flying, if you remember the original American logo, it was a circle with a star, and in the middle of the round dot was red. So anybody looking at it, with that red dot was very prominent. A lot of them thought that this was a different style of Japanese plane. So they ended up getting through, and they ended up shooting down 4 planes, actually. Now, the planes flew approximately 2,250 miles for 13 hours until they ran out of gas. Of course, that was a record. No other B-25s ever had that much gas tank capacity. 15 of the 16 planes crash landed on or near the coast. Herndon's plane flew north and landed in Vladivostok, Russia. And what the Russians did to show they were on their side, they took them all and acted like they were in prison camp, but they were actually shuttling them and took them to Iran and released them to the British in Iran, which showed them that they were on their side. 14 of the 16 crews survived. 2 crews of 8 men died. 2 crew members bailed out and drowned at sea. 1 crew member successfully bailed out and was in the mountains, and at the nighttime when he was traveling to meet up with his buddies, he fell off a cliff and he got killed. 2 crew members were captured by 2 crews of 8 flyers were captured by the Japanese. 3 were executed, and 1 starved in captivity. And the remaining 4 POWs of Japan were alive and were reunited when we took possession of Japan in 1945. Doolittle actually thought he was a failure. He said, all the planes are gone. You know, we have just really made a disaster of this whole thing. Well, he ended up coming back, and this gives you, every member got the Distinguished Flying Cross. And several of them were posthumously. Of course, Sally ended up coming back to Columbia. He ended up being a school teacher here. And if I'm correct, he spent time at Airport High School and Columbia High School teaching. Herndon, again, ended up marrying Crouch's sister, and he was in Edgefield and ended up moving to Saluda, and he is now buried in Saluda graveyard there. And when you walk into his family plot, you look at the bottom of it, and it says Doolittle Raider. That's about the only recognition that I have seen. Unfortunately, William Farrell here, he was the tallest and the biggest of them all, and they executed him with 2 others in Japan. Cole, once again, was the last one to live out the rest of the cruise, and he ended up staying as the coordinator of all that. Now, after they sent the cruise off to the Doolittle Raiders, JC ended up taking a squadron of B-25s and flew this route here and ended up in Burma. And in Burma, they turned over the bombers. He set up the bombing crews, and from there they took off. This is again him, my uncle, Distinguished Flying Cross, Lead Clusters. He got that a couple of times. Air Medal, he got that a couple of times. Distinguished citations. Anyway, he fought in every campaign all over the world, and later on was LeMay's man to test the B-29. Now, this is the big legend about Lake Murray. What happened is that the bombing of Bomb Island, they had laid out these smudge pots in a circle, in a large circle, and they were the first guys doing nighttime bombing. Well, unfortunately, there was a heat inversion. The fog ended up covering the island. They overshot the island, but if you look at where they came in here across Bomb Island and they kept going farther, the plane, unfortunately, got to the Saluda traffic circle, and they dropped their bombs on the Saluda traffic circle. So that caused a lot of damage, but from there, they were all repaired, and one of the members of the family that owned the gas station there had to climb the telephone pole and cut the power off. And from there, when the power went off and the lights weren't lit up, the bombing stopped. Against the peace. My dad went on to go to the Dumont Television Network. He was the original man on the street. That's Dad with Elizabeth Taylor. And this is Dad with Give 'em Hell, Harry Truman. And we're going to move forward now. This is me working in advance with President Daddy Bush. And it says, Peterson's works advance for George Bush's first trip as President of the United States, and that was to come to South Carolina and thank South Carolina for winning the primary, which catapulted him to the election. Now, once that was over with, I came back to Columbia, and Bill Clinton at the time canceled all these military training groups that were out and about. One of them was airplane retrieval on Lake Murray, and they were trying to find all the bombers. There was a story on WIS-TV. They said the crews are going to be leaving in 2 weeks, and they hadn't found the last bomber. Well, this is my Aunt Catherine Tapp, and we were sitting and talking to her while she was on her deathbed, really. And I said, I can't believe they haven't found the last plane. And she said, well, I saw it go down up at Lake Murray. And I said, well, where did it go down? She said, about Red Knoll School. And I was like, yeah, she got to be out of it. She said, no, you knucklehead. We were there at the beginning as a kid, and they would, on top of the hill, would look down into the valley and knew where everything was in the valley. And she said, go get me one of the old maps. And we brought it in, and sure enough, if you look right here, there's Red Knoll School. They went out the next day and found the plane. And this right here is, she'd always tell us when we'd go out fishing or hunting, she would say, all right, well, y'all going out, bring back the big one. And when those guys came in, she was telling that story, and the crew said, we got the big one. And this is a picture, well, he called it the X-ray of what the plane looked like under Lake Murray. And so that's what it actually looked like. And this is the signing when they found it March 12th, 1993. And that was all of the people that were on the crew. This right here, of course, let's go all the way up to 9/11/05. And we put together the group to go pick the plane up out of Lake Murray. So now this was bridge construction outfits that they would go build bridges over the ocean and over the lakes, and they fastened this whole thing together and pretty much had a crew on there. As you can see, they even had a bathroom up there and all this heavy lift equipment. And of course, they went, put the boats, put them in place, and these are the crews that went down and strapped it. You can see they brought it up now, and there's the plane right under the whole setup. And one of the problems they had, it was filled with silt. And as they were bringing it up, they had to send divers down to move the silt off the planes and try and get as much off to lighten the load. And what they figured out, the best way to do it was to leave it submerged, and as they're going back, the movement of the water over the plane would help take a lot of the silt out of it. So this is it right here, first flight in decades. And then after that, they of course brought it to the surface right there at the Irmo side of the dam. They lifted it up, and because there was so much weight to it, you could see where the front fuselage here was beginning to crack off. So this is of course another view of it. And the Southern Museum of Flight, Birmingham, Alabama, said that we could rebuild this plane, and so they ended up getting it. Well, this is another story. But that's actually what they have at the Southern Museum of Flight. Now, they have received so many planes with so many of the World War I, greatest generation dying off. They're getting more and more planes, and we've been in contact with them, and they said, we will give you back the plane if you pay the bill that we had bringing it up to the museum, and you use those same guys to pay them to bring it back to Columbia, that you could have the plane, you know, just the cost. Now, that was the article about my aunt finding the plane, and that's part of the display. But this is what our eventual idea is. We are building, or in the process of building, a Doolittle Raiders Museum out at Columbia Airport. As you're coming in from Airport Boulevard and you take that first right going in, off to the left is where the Skyline Country and Western Club is. All that was the original airbase. Matter of fact, the Skyline Club is where the movie theater was at the original Army Air Base. And so we're in the process of getting that taken care of. But our idea was that we were going to create what the plane looked like on the bottom of Lake Murray and take all of it and lay it out. So that's something that's we're working on now. This is a memorial to all the people that died during World War II flying out of Columbia Army Air Base, and it included 256 men and 1 woman. There were female flyers that would ferry planes from Nebraska to Columbia, and they were talking to this young lady, and they're talking about how they were going to take her to the club. Afterwards when she landed, and for some reason the plane dropped right out of the sky at the end of the runway, and she was the only female to lose her life. This gives you an idea of that, and this, of course, is the bombing range or the historical marker up at Lake Murray, and so that gives you the full circle of the Doolittle Raiders here in Columbia. So thank you for sticking around. Any questions?
Richard, back when many of the Raiders were still alive, y'all would do these things at the airport and do it, and we could get on a B-25,
Right.
get down in the little gunner turret up front, and they would fly us over Lake Murray.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if y'all can ever do that again, but that's one of the funnest trips I've ever had ever.
That's one of the things that we're looking at is, when they did the 60th here, that was the largest coming together of B-25s. And of course, I was part of that. And on Main Street, those planes flew over one at a time. And with all those buildings on either side and those planes going over, you talking about noise, but what a rush to see those guys flying over. But that's something that we're
I'll do that again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and looking to do it during the 225.
I got 2 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Legend is that the last Raider was to drink from a bottle of brandy that was left.
Very good
And the
point.
other is, right north of the dam is River Road where it says Hollywood and the Lake.
Yes, that was
that
Hollywood
related?
Point.
All right.
That's what they used to board.
That's what?
That's what my ancestors had on Hollywood and Hollywood Point. Now, if you look on a lake map, there's Hollywood Cove and Hollywood Point.
Is that where they did the R&R?
No, that's where the family had a house. They did the R&R. There was actually a country club called the South Congaree Country Club. That if you're looking at, have you heard about that?
Just South Congaree is coming
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
Well,
I can say that because I have relatives.
well, back then it was a little more prestigious, but if you're sitting in the terminal and you look straight across, that back behind the runways, back in that hole is a lake, actually a little pond, and that is where the clubhouse was. And that's where the officers would go and kick their heels up away from everybody else.
With the bottle of brandy.
Pardon?
The brandy,
Yeah.
the bottle of brandy.
Oh, bottle of brandy. Well, they did. They had this bottle that they said they would wait, but when there was about 7 of them left, they said, "The hell with this. Let's go ahead and open it up." Whoever's the last one ain't gonna drink that bottle by themselves. And it was put in a great little cup. They have these little silver cups for each one of their names on it. And when there were 7 still remaining, they broke it out, popped the top on it, and each one of them drank out of their cup and saluted their bygone crew members. And the bottle is still sealed and part of the Doolittle stuff that we hope to bring to Columbia. And so that's, any other questions? Huh? Yes, sir.
You may have told me this, I heard when they came, they asked for volunteers.
Yeah.
This mission. I heard the whole group of them volunteered.
Yes, sir.
And then they had to cull them.
Right.
Yeah, but the whole group volunteered.
Exactly. And that's what they did. They were taking them out on that bombing run I was telling you about and flying them and see who was doing what. But most of the season ones that came out of Pendleton, Oregon was the 17th. They were the most experienced, and they actually didn't do any training here. They went, by the time they got here and they put them all together. Yes, sir, General.
If you'd like to see a V-25, what it really looks like, go down to Hamilton Owens Field.
Yes, sir.
Monday nights, right?
And,
Yes, sir.
it's
The first hangar from
just
the,
on your right. It's-
that's right, that's the South Carolina Historic
It was
Aviation.
stored, it came out of Lake Greenwood.
Yes, sir, Skunky. That came out of Lake Greenwood. And what was really funny about that plane, the way the plane ended up going down in Lake Murray is that the pilot, contrary to popular belief, he was flying along following the river. And back then the trees weren't as high as they are now, of course. And then all of a sudden, boom, here was the dam in front of him. Of course, he had to pull up. And as he pulled up, it put such a strain on the engine that it conked out and it went in and pancaked in the water. And when it came in and landed, one of the engines grabbed and it spun the plane around and it really saved it from breaking up. And my Aunt Catherine, who, you know, later on is in this, the Plymouth dealership that was right down here on Elmwood.
Marion Burnside?
I didn't know, it was,
Oliver?
Oliver, that's right, Oliver. They had a house next to them, and they said, we just saw a plane go down. They got in the boat and went out, and they were all standing on the end of the wing, like, you know, what are we gonna do? And she pulled up, just like they pulled up to a dock, and each one of the crew members stepped off into the boat, and then they said they watched the plane go like that underwater.
Wow. How deep did it sink? How?
150 feet, over 150 feet.
Gosh, that's deep.
And that was one of the big deals. They had to go down and secure these straps under the wings. And they went down several times trying to figure out how to get these slats on. They got one of them, but one side wouldn't work. A female scuba diver went down there and figured it out, pulled the strap and came back up. And that was one of the pictures of the guys in it. They said, okay, it's done. You know, got it. But it was a female scuba diver that finally got the last strap around the wings. Any other questions? All right.